You were supposed to be watching him, Karen said, her voice slicing through the phone line while I stood in the ER hallway, still in the scrubs I'd been wearing since 6 a.m. This is exactly why we said you shouldn't have moved him into your house alone. You can't handle this, Melissa. Clearly. I looked through the small window into the trauma bay, where our father, Gerald, lay with a fractured hip, waiting for an orthopedic surgeon to review his imaging, and I felt something inside me go very, very still. Karen, I said, I was at work. I was literally delivering a baby when he fell. I have a nurse's aide who checks on him every 90 minutes. Well, clearly 90 minutes wasn't enough, was it? She snapped. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn about doing everything yourself, this wouldn't have happened. I wanted to remind her that everything yourself had included 14 months of daily care, medication management, doctor's appointments, and financial sacrifice that she and our brother Wesley had contributed exactly nothing toward. I wanted to remind her that Wesley hadn't visited Dad in 5 months, that Karen's own last visit had been a 90-minute stop over the winter holidays. Instead, I said something I would come to regret only slightly, because it turned out to be more true than even I understood in that moment. There are cameras in the house, Karen. We'll know exactly what happened. I didn't know yet how much those cameras would end up showing, not just about the fall, but about who had actually been present for my father's care, and who had spent 5 months lying about their own absence, while positioning themselves to blame me for the consequences of it. Backstory set up. My name is Melissa Torres, I'm 40 years old, and I work as a labor and delivery nurse at a regional hospital outside Sacramento, California. I've been married to my husband Rob for 12 years, and we have 2 children, Ethan and Lily, 13 and 10, whose lives got quietly rearranged around my father's care in ways I'm still adding up, even now. My father, Gerald Torres, was 76 when this story began. My mother, Yolanda, passed away in 2020 from a stroke, and after that, Dad lived alone in a small house about 20 minutes from mine, managing reasonably well for the first year or so, though we all noticed him slowing down, forgetting names occasionally, needing more time to complete tasks that used to come easily, showing early signs of the mild cognitive impairment that a neurologist, Dr. Sandra Way, would later formally diagnose in early 2024. I have 2 siblings. Karen is 44, works as a hotel event coordinator, and lives about 40 minutes away with her husband and 2 adult children who've moved out. Wesley is 37, works in commercial real estate, lives roughly an hour and a half away in the Bay Area, married with no kids, and has always maintained what I can only describe as a comfortable emotional distance from anything resembling family responsibility. Dad's decline accelerated after a minor stroke in January 2024, what his doctors called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, but one that left him with balance issues, mild left side weakness, and a marked increase in confusion that made living alone no longer safe. There was no family meeting where we sat down and decided who would take him in. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters enormously for what happened later. What happened instead was this. I was the one at the hospital when he was discharged. I was the one the case manager called, asking about discharge planning, asking whether there was a family member who could provide a safe environment. I was the one who, in that moment, standing in a hospital hallway with a case manager waiting for an answer, said, "He can stay with us, we'll figure it out." Nobody else offered. Nobody else was even in the building. We converted our downstairs office into a bedroom for Dad. I hired a part-time home health aide, a wonderful woman named Consuela, to come for 4 hours in the mornings, 5 days a week, at $25 an hour, so I could work my hospital shifts, and I covered the remaining hours myself around my schedule, with Rob helping evenings when he could. I want to walk you through what my daily life actually looked like during those 14 months, because I think it's easy for people who haven't lived it to underestimate the accumulation. I'd wake at 5:15, get Dad's morning medications ready, a blood thinner, a statin, an antihypertensive, and donepezil for the cognitive impairment. Get my own kids ready for school, hand off to Consuela when she arrived at 7, work a 12-hour shift, come home to relieve her, manage dinner, evening medications, help with homework, and collapse into bed most nights around 10:30, only to do it again. I dropped my hospital hours from full-time to a 0.8 FTE, costing me approximately $8,200 a year in lost income. I paid for the bulk of Consuela's wages myself, roughly $2,000 a month, because Dad's Social Security covered only a portion, and asking Karen or Wesley to contribute always produced vague promises that never materialized into actual payments. The siblings' absence didn't happen all at once. It crept in, the way these things always seem to. In the first few weeks after Dad moved in with us, Karen visited twice a week, bringing groceries, sitting with him for an hour or two. Wesley called every few days, even visited once in February, staying for a weekend. But by April 2024, Karen's visits had dropped to once every 2 weeks, then once a month, always preceded by some version of, "Work has been insane, Melissa. The Hendricks wedding took over my entire month." Wesley's calls became sporadic, his visits non-existent after that one February weekend, replaced by texts that said things like, "Swamped with the Milbray deal, tell Dad I love him." By August 2024, 7 months into Dad living with us, I texted the family group chat, trying to keep everyone informed the way I had faithfully done since the beginning. Dad had a rough week. Some increased confusion. Dr. Wei adjusted his Dunham-Pezzel dosage. Also, his balance seems worse. I'm going to look into a walker. Karen, poor Dad. Let me know if you need me to grab anything from the store. Wesley, sending love. So swamped right now, barely keeping my head above water at work. Nobody asked if I needed a break. Nobody asked how I was managing 12-hour hospital shifts on top of full-time caregiving. Nobody offered to take a weekend so I could breathe. And increasingly, I noticed something else. A pattern I didn't fully register as troubling until much later. Karen and Wesley had started a separate group chat, one I wasn't part of, that occasionally slipped through when Karen accidentally sent something meant for it into our shared thread and quickly deleted it. Too late for me not to see the tail end. "She's basically running the show over there. We should probably..." I didn't chase that thread down at the time. I was too tired. I had a father to care for, a job to hold on to, and 2 kids who needed their mother to still exist, somewhere underneath all of it. By December 2024, I made a decision that, in hindsight, was one of the smartest things I did during this entire ordeal. Though at the time it felt almost paranoid. I installed 2 indoor security cameras, one in the living room where Dad spent most of his time, and one in the hallway outside his bedroom, primarily so I could check on him remotely during my hospital shifts when Consuela wasn't there, and so I'd have some peace of mind about his safety when he was alone for the roughly 90-minute gaps between when Consuela left and when I got home, or during the rare stretches when I had to step out. I told Karen and Wesley about the cameras. I remember Wesley's response distinctly. "Seems a little excessive, but sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night." It would help far more than any of us could have predicted. Rising conflict. By February 2025, 14 months into Dad's care, the exhaustion had become something close to chronic. I was averaging maybe 5 hours of sleep a night, working 3 12-hour hospital shifts a week, on top of full-time caregiving the rest of the time, and I could feel my own health starting to fray. Frequent headaches, a resting heart rate my own doctor flagged as elevated at my last physical, a short temper with Rob and the kids that I hated in myself but couldn't seem to fully control. Dad's cognitive decline had also progressed. Dr. Wei's most recent assessment, in January 2025, noted a decline from mild cognitive impairment toward what she described as early-stage dementia, likely mixed vascular and neurodegenerative etiology, and flagged increased fall risk, given his combination of balance issues, medication effects, and cognitive fluctuation. On the day of the fall, Tuesday, February 18th, I was at the hospital, in the middle of an active delivery that had turned complicated, unable to check my phone for nearly 3 hours. Consuela had left at 11 a.m. as scheduled. Dad was alone for what should have been roughly 90 minutes before I got home at 12:30. Instead, my shift ran long due to the delivery, and I didn't get home until nearly 2:15. I found him on the living room floor, conscious, but in significant pain, unable to move his right leg without screaming. I called 911 immediately, and the diagnosis at the ER confirmed a fractured right hip, requiring surgical repair. A partial hip replacement performed 2 days later by an orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Bennett Okafor. I texted Karen and Wesley from the ER waiting room. Dad fell at home, fractured his hip. We're at the ER now. Surgery likely needed. Please come if you can. Karen arrived 4 hours later. Wesley didn't come at all that day, citing a work conflict he couldn't move, arriving instead 2 days later, after the surgery was already complete. It was in that ER hallway, waiting for the ortho consult, that Karen said the words that would define the following weeks. "You were supposed to be watching him. This is exactly why we said you shouldn't have moved him into your house alone." I remember staring at her, genuinely stunned, because as far as I knew, nobody had said anything of the kind. Certainly not to me, not at any point over the preceding 14 months, when I was the only one showing up. "Karen, I was at work delivering a baby. I have an aide. This isn't a supervision failure. This is what happens with a fall-risk dementia patient, sometimes, even with reasonable precautions in place." "Well, maybe you took on more than you could actually handle," she said. "Nobody made you insist on doing this all yourself." That phrase, "nobody made you," would become the drumbeat of the following month. Wesley, when he finally showed up, offered a variation. "Look, I'm not saying it's your fault exactly, but you have kind of always wanted to be the one in control of Dad's care. Maybe if we'd had more of a say in things, this wouldn't have happened." I sat with that accusation for days, feeling something between rage and a strange, creeping self-doubt, the kind that comes from being told repeatedly that your reality isn't real. Had I been too controlling? Had I somehow shut them out? I genuinely began questioning my own memory of the past 14 months, which is, I'd later learn, exactly the kind of psychological erosion that happens when people you trust rewrite a shared history in real time. During Dad's hospitalization and subsequent rehab stay, 3 weeks at a skilled nursing facility for post-surgical recovery, I was the only sibling who visited daily. Karen came twice during those 3 weeks. Wesley came once, for approximately 40 minutes. When I raised, gently, the question of splitting the rehab facility's copay costs, which came to $2,100 out of pocket after Medicare's coverage limitations, Karen's response was swift. "I don't think it's fair to ask us to pay when this happened under your supervision in the first place." I remember sitting in my car outside the rehab facility after that conversation, doing the math I'd been avoiding for months. Over 14 months I had spent, by conservative estimate, just over $34,000 of my own money, Consuela's wages, medical co-pays, home modifications including a hospital bed and grab bars, and now this rehab facility gap. Karen and Wesley's combined contribution over that same period, $0. And now, somehow, in the aftermath of an accident that occurred during a brief, reasonable gap in supervision after 14 months of me providing near-total care, I was the one being blamed, not just for the fall itself, but retroactively, for the entire arrangement that they themselves had never offered any alternative to. Climax stat Betrayal revealed Dad was discharged from rehab in mid-March 2025, returning to my home with an updated care plan that included physical therapy 3 times a week and a higher level of supervision, given his increased fall risk post-surgery. It was around this time that Karen and Wesley's behavior shifted into something that felt less like grief-driven overreaction and more like calculated positioning. Karen called me in early April, and after a few minutes of surface pleasantries, pivoted with a directness that caught me off guard. "Wesley and I have been talking," she said, "and we think it's time to discuss a more formal arrangement going forward. Given what happened with the fall, we're not comfortable with you having sole decision-making authority over Dad's care and finances anymore." I felt my stomach drop. "Karen, I don't have sole authority. I've been keeping you both informed of everything for 14 months. Being informed after the fact isn't the same as having input, she said. And frankly, given the fall happened on your watch, we think there needs to be independent oversight. Wesley found an elder law attorney who specializes in this kind of family situation. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from that attorney, informing me that Karen and Wesley intended to petition for a review of my role as Dad's informal caregiver and financial helper, citing concerns about the adequacy of supervision, evidenced by the February fall, and separately, raising questions about the appropriateness of continued unsupervised financial access, given that I had, over the preceding year, made numerous payments related to Dad's care from an account he'd added me to for convenience. I sat at my kitchen table reading that letter, and something in me went cold in a way I hadn't experienced even during the worst of the exhaustion of the preceding 14 months. They were accusing me of financial impropriety, and implicitly, of neglect. Me, the one who had spent $34,000 of my own money. The one who had reduced my hospital hours, missed my own children's events, converted my home, hired an aide, managed 11 medications, attended every single doctor's appointment for 14 straight months while they visited a combined total of perhaps a dozen times. I called Karen, my voice shaking with a fury I rarely let myself feel. "You're accusing me of financial impropriety? I have every receipt. I have never once used Dad's money for anything but his own care." "That's what someone would say either way," Karen replied, a coldness in her voice I'd never heard directed at me before. "We just want proper oversight. If you've got nothing to hide, this shouldn't be a problem for you." "And the fall?" I said. "You're really going to stand there and tell an attorney I neglected him, when you two were barely present for 14 months? "We were dealing with our own lives," Karen said. "That doesn't mean we don't have a say now." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time, feeling something I can only describe as a specific, devastating grief, not just for the accusation itself, but for what it revealed about how easily 14 months of sacrifice could be rewritten into a story where I was somehow the negligent one, and my absent siblings were the concerned advocates stepping in to protect our father. Turn twist. I want to tell you I fell apart. I did, for about 2 days, and then something in me went very quiet and very focused, and I did what I should have started doing from the very beginning, though in truth, I already had more than I realized. I contacted an elder law attorney myself, a measured, sharp woman named Attorney Renata Cho, and brought her everything. Every receipt for Consuela's wages, totaling over $27,000 across 14 months. Every medical copay statement. Every message in the family group chat showing me relaying updates faithfully. And Karen and Wesley's consistent pattern of minimal, sporadic involvement. Bank statements showing money flowing exclusively from my own account into Dad's care expenses, never a single unexplained withdrawal, never a cent moving in any direction that could remotely suggest impropriety. And then I told her about the cameras. I pulled the footage from February 18th, the day of the fall, time-stamped and unedited, straight from the security system's cloud storage. It showed Dad in the living room at 11:02 a.m., Consuela saying goodbye, and confirming he was settled in his chair, with his tablet and a water bottle within reach. Standard practice we'd established months earlier. It showed Dad at 12:47 p.m., attempting to stand without his walker, something Dr. Wei's notes explicitly warned was a risk, given his cognitive fluctuation, and losing his balance, falling before he'd even taken a full step. It showed me arriving at 2:14, finding him, and calling 911 within seconds. There was nothing in that footage suggesting negligence. There was, in fact, footage from the preceding 14 months, still stored in the system's rolling archive, showing an almost daily pattern: me administering medications, Consuela assisting with physical therapy exercises, me sitting with Dad in the evenings, helping him eat dinner, watching television together. 14 months of quiet, unremarkable, consistent care, all documented, all unedited, all standing in stark contrast to a caregiving arrangement my siblings were now trying to characterize as negligent. But the footage that actually stopped the entire dispute in its tracks was something else entirely. something I hadn't even thought to look for until Attorney Cho asked a simple, pointed question. How many times does the footage show Karen or Wesley present in the home over these 14 months? I pulled the logs. Karen appeared in the footage 11 times over 14 months, totaling just under 9 hours of cumulative presence. Wesley appeared 4 times, totaling roughly 3 hours. Meanwhile, the footage showed me, or evidence of my direct care, essentially every single day. When Attorney Cho sent this documentation to Karen and Wesley's attorney, alongside a pointed note that any formal petition alleging inadequate supervision or financial impropriety would be met with a full production of this footage in any hearing, their attorney's tone shifted within a week. But the moment that truly ended things wasn't legal maneuvering. It was Dad. Dad, recovering well from his hip surgery, still cognitively fragile but having good days, asked to see Attorney Cho directly, with Karen and Wesley present. In that meeting, when Karen tried once more to suggest that concerns remained about the arrangement, Dad, sitting in his wheelchair, said something that ended the conversation entirely. "I watched you two on those cameras too, you know," he said, his voice slower than it used to be, but perfectly clear. "Or I should say, I didn't watch you, because you weren't there. Melissa was there, every day. I may forget things now, but I haven't forgotten that." Resolution. The formal petition Karen and Wesley's attorney had drafted was never filed. Facing footage that documented, in unambiguous time-stamped detail, exactly who had been present and exactly who hadn't, there was simply nothing left to argue. Attorney Cho helped establish a formal caregiver agreement going forward, including modest compensation for my ongoing care, $1,800 a month, drawn from Dad's own funds, a fraction of what a professional live-in arrangement would have cost, but formal recognition, finally, of labor that had gone unpaid and unacknowledged for 14 months. Dad also updated his estate planning that same month, with Attorney Cho's guidance, allocating a significantly larger share to me, in explicit recognition of what the document calls the sustained, documented care provided by my daughter Melissa, without which my safety and well-being over the past year would have been severely compromised. Karen didn't contest it, though our relationship remains strained in a way I'm not sure will ever fully heal. Wesley sent one message, weeks later. "I think we let ourselves believe things were fine, because it was easier than facing how much you were actually carrying. I'm sorry, Melissa. I know that doesn't undo anything. I appreciated the honesty, even if it arrived far too late to change what those 14 months, and the accusation that followed them, actually cost me. When I think about everything now, the $34,000 spent from my own pocket, the reduced hospital hours, the missed sleep, the moment in that ER hallway when my own sister looked at me and blamed me for an accident that happened during the 190-minute gap in 14 months of near-constant care, I don't think about the cameras as vindication, exactly. I think about how quietly, how easily, an entire history of sacrifice can be rewritten by people who weren't there to witness it, and how grateful I am that something in me, some instinct toward caution, I couldn't fully explain at the time, thought to document it anyway. If you're the one providing the care nobody else will, keep records. Keep footage if you can, not because you expect betrayal, but because the people who are absent will sometimes need cold, unambiguous proof before they'll believe, or admit, what your presence actually meant. The camera never lied about who was in that room every single day. I only wish it hadn't needed to.